It should be fun.
Yep. Go ahead.
This On September 30th, Sands News Bites reported the following story. The European Union plans to introduce the binding safe processor rules, which would hold vendors of cloud services in the EU liable for data security breaches. Vendors would sign up for what amounts to an accreditation. Consumers are likely to feel safer doing business with a company that is willing to stand behind their services. The rules are an update to the Data Protection Directive. The companies will be required to demonstrate their compliance with certain data protection standards for approval under the rules. Current laws hold data owners responsible for data loss. The Newsbite's editor added the following comment from me. The devil is in the details, and these rules may be helpful. However, the idea that one can transfer the responsibility for protecting the data from the owner to the custodian of the data by fiat or by any other means is absurd on its face. The decisions about protecting the data cannot be separated from the decisions about collecting it and using it. Now, I confess I misread the details, but they are definitely where the devil is hiding. It turns out that this rule is nothing like it sounds, either in its name or in this report. Instead, it was sought by Amazon, Google, and others to say that EU enterprises may rely for security of their data upon service providers that are certified by an EU country as complying with these rules and without regard to the location of the service provider. It is a response in part to the fact that that Europeans will not do business with U.S. service providers because they are subject to the USA Patriot Act. They are concerned that they will be accused of improper reliance. The EU has never been happy with the idea of data on Europeans being stored in the U.S. This week, Newsbite reported this story. Stanford Hospital pins breach responsibility on third-party billing contractor. Stanford Hospital and Clinics says that a data security breach that compromised the personal information of 20,000 patients is the fault of a third-party contractor. One of the patients filed a $20 million lawsuit against Stanford following the breach. The data was exposed because of a spreadsheet handled by a billing contractor somehow was posted to a student homework help website. The compromised information includes names, diagnosis, codes, and admission and discharge dates. Now, I have to tell you, the hospital tells a really great tale. Mind you, it does not excuse them for the breach. However, it might have confused a jury if they had not attempted to try it out in the media first. Seems they turned the data over to a collection service, MCSC, in encrypted form. This is allowed under HIPAA rules, but requires that they have security of the data as part of their agreement with the service provider. Needless to say, the collection agency, MCSC, decrypted the data. It converted it to a spreadsheet before turning it over to an unauthorized third party. This third party posted it as an attachment to a request for assistance to a site called Student of Fortune, where it remained for a year. Student of Fortune is a site where students can solicit assistance with their homework assignments. It turns out that this guy needed assistance with graphical representation of the data in the spreadsheet. It would probably be unfair for one to infer that someone familiar with such a site is a recent student. There must be some truth in this tale. You can't make this stuff up. It seems clear that there's plenty of blame to go around here. However, the question is not blame, but responsibility, ethical, legal, financial, and otherwise. Public and private enterprises are increasingly relying upon contractors and other enterprises, partners, to carry out duties and responsibilities that historically have been performed by employees and within the enterprise. Therefore, it's timely to revisit this question of responsibility. Both of these stories suggest that the responsibility rests with the custodians of the data. The first story suggests that the responsibility can be assigned to the custodian by order of the state or the consent of the custodian. The second suggests that the responsibility moves with the data. Ultimately, the legal questions raised by these stories will be decided by courts. I can hardly wait. I'm a great fan of court records and decisions. While subject to error, they are much more reliable than the statements of the parties, which often tend to be somewhat self-serving. In information assurance, we have traditionally assigned protection duties and responsibilities in terms of roles. That is, management, staff, owners, custodians, and users. We have argued that by definition and default, the responsibility to protect the data rests with the owner, the manager responsible for all decisions about the data. The owner makes the decision to collect and store the data. The owner, again, by definition, makes the decisions about who can use the data. The owner makes the decisions as to the sensitivity of the data, that is, how much to spend on protection and how much risk to accept. The owner's responsibility includes communicating these decisions to the custodians and the users. It's difficult to see how this control and discretion can be separated from the responsibility for its exercise. Our colleague, Bob Johnston, likes to argue that when entrusted to process, you are obligated to safeguard. However, as a custodian, I would respond by asking how much and at whose expense. Clearly, a custodian would not want to spend more than the owner would and would expect to be reimbursed or compensated for what he does spend. What is really at issue here is how we identify and select custodians, describe their duties, compensate them for those duties, what penalties they must pay for breach of those duties, and to whom they must pay. Obviously, this begins with negotiations between the owner and the custodian. I will continue to argue, both as matters of definition and practicality, that the responsibility for the results, the success of those negotiations, must start and end with the owner. As a matter of law and good public policy, we want the responsibility in the same hands as the discretion and control. The alternative would permit the owner to pick the low-cost service provider and then escape responsibility for any consequences. One might call that moral hazard. Service providers are in the role of custodians of the data. Their duty is to the owner of the data, the party that pays them, not necessarily to the subjects of the data. They must be diligent in the execution of the duties that they have agreed to and for which in part they are being paid. Stanford Health had a duty to their patients to protect the data. That duty did not go down when, for their own convenience and efficiency, they decided to give a copy to another party, a party of their choice. That they encrypted it for purpose of transfer did not protect it from that agency, to whom they also gave the key. The agency's duty was to Stanford Health, to protect the data in accordance with their agreement, the provisions of which are left to guess. While it is unlikely that Stanford Health contemplated the possibility that MCSC would give a copy to a contractor, their agreement should have resisted it. As security staff, some of us for the owners, some for the custodians, our role is to assist the business managers and the lawyers in expressing the security requirements in such a way that all parties understand their duties and are likely to discharge them in a manner that will produce the intended results. Our job does not stop there. We must go on to measure and report the results, note variances from the expected and intended, and recommend timely corrective action on a timely basis. Timely is defined as before rather than after any breach. To the extent that doing this is difficult, we are called professionals and are paid the big bucks. See you next week.
Great example, Bill. It also sounds like, you're getting into that whole area of second and third party, SLAs and contracts and things of that nature. And that, the healthcare company just decided, hey, listen, we're gonna encrypt it and abide by HIPAA, but we're going to give it to these other guys, and what the hell?
Well, the question is, the healthcare company is being sued. Nobody has yet talked about suing the collection agency. Of course, the collection agency owes a duty to Stanford, and to the extent that Stanford loses money in the lawsuit, they would have a cause of action against the custodians. But we don't want to relieve Stanford of the responsibility for choosing the custodian and agreeing with the custodian as to how the data was going to be protected. Now, there's a lot of this that we don't know yet, and that's why I want to see the results of the trial. One of the things that I really hope is that this thing goes to trial. We've seen an awful lot of these things that have been settled out of court, so that we never, ever really understand completely what the details were. What kind of agreement existed between Stanford Health and MCSC?
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense, and you're right. If they do put daylight on it, we'll get lucky, and we will see exactly what people were thinking and how it was all documented. The likelihood of that happening, I don't know. The lawyers may get a hold of that earlier on and say, hey, look, we better keep this thing quiet. It's not going to look good for anybody here, and they may settle the whole thing out of court.
Part of this goes back to the fact that in information technology, we have never been very good at writing service level agreements, and we've been even less good at writing service level agreements in security. If we are going to have these kinds of relationships at a distance, we've got to learn how to do that, and we've got to learn how to do it really, really well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. All right, that's a great talk. I actually was on with you with that one. I was following that completely. Thank God you didn't go too far over my head on that one. But Bill, great talk. We'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks a lot.